Thank you, Madam Lieutenant Governor, for your kind introduction, and good evening to those of you joining us virtually tonight. Speaker Rendon, Pro Tem Tony Atkins, members of the California Legislature, and all the elected and state officials. To my amazing wife, Jennifer, our first partner of the state of California, thank you all for being here in, well, the most 2021 way possible, and that's remotely. You know, tonight we mark the unprecedented moment in California history. To reflect on where we've been this past year, I think it's important we consider where we are. And I'm speaking to you from Dodger Stadium, transformed from the home of last year's World Series champions into the centerpiece of America's mass vaccination campaign. Instead of fans in the stands, we see nurses in PPE saving lives one injection at a time. All because a year ago, a once-in-a-century pandemic arrived on our shores. COVID was no one's fault, but it quickly became everyone's burden, forcing hardworking Californians into impossible choices to go to work and risk infection or stay home and lose your job. It magnified daily worries about feeding your kids, paying rent, and keeping loved ones safe. It made the unthinkable commonplace. COVID patients cared for by doctors and nurses and paramedics who, despite the chaos and risk to themselves, paused to hold the hands of strangers in their final moments. Too many forever goodbyes over FaceTime. 54,395 Californians we now mourn with broken hearts. That's almost the exact same number of empty seats behind me, marking a silent tribute to loved ones who live forever in our memories. 54,395 Californians who will never be forgotten by family members and friends, nor by the healthcare workers who bore witness to unimaginable tragedy. But not every COVID hero, not everyone wears scrubs, from the grocery workers to the custodians who get a fraction of the gratitude that they deserve, to the parents who have juggled and struggled, moms especially, but kept charging ahead. Your quiet bravery has created light in the darkest of times. You know, Dr. King once said, only when it's dark enough can you see the stars. So tonight, under the lights of this stadium, even as we grieve, let's allow ourselves to dream of brighter days ahead. Because we won't be defined by this moment. We'll be defined by what we do because of it. After all, we are California. We don't wait for someone else to show us the way forward. We go first, and we go boldly. We led in gay rights, gun rights, and criminal justice reform. And now we lead on combating COVID. You know, from the earliest days of this pandemic, California trusted in science and data, and we met the moment. Last January, we welcomed Americans home, accepting repatriation flights from mainland China. And a year ago today, we brought to shore the Grand Princess, which was stranded off the coast of California, further opening up our eyes to the seriousness of this disease. We were the first state to issue a stay-at-home order, which helped us avoid the early spikes in cases. Top minds from our nation's leading research institutions and life science companies immediately jumped into the development of groundbreaking treatments and vaccines. And while others competed to buy personal protective equipment at exorbitant prices, we quickly built our own pipeline, supplying critical gear to millions and millions of essential workers. We sent ventilators and doctors to New York as well as to other states that so desperately needed them. And we developed the most comprehensive COVID testing program in the country, including a first-in-the-nation state-run testing lab. We enlisted additional healthcare workers to expand capacity, and we readied our ICUs. Our advanced planning and our curve flattening meant that hospitals were ready for surges, all of which is why California's death rate has remained one of the lowest per capita in the nation, 134 deaths per 100,000 compared to 158 nationally, 153 in Texas, and 247 in New York. Now, finally, vaccines are here. And we were the first to launch these mass vaccination sites in partnership with FEMA, now a model for other states all across the country. Today we have the most robust vaccination program in the country. Think about this. California now ranks 6th in the world world for vaccination distribution, ahead of countries, not states, ahead of countries like Russia, Germany, Israel, and France. You know, I know our progress hasn't always felt fast enough. And look, we've made mistakes. I have made mistakes, but we own them. We learn from them, and we never stop trying. After all, that's the California spirit. We're bent, but not broken, bloodied, but unbowed, resolved to make brighter days ahead, and not to let the pain of last year to deter us from the hopefulness of tomorrow. Look, the state of our state, it remains determined. I remain determined. And I just want you to know, we're not going to change course just because of a few naysayers and doomsdayers. So to the California critics out there who are promoting partisan political power grabs with outdated prejudices and rejecting everything that makes California truly great, we say this: we will not be distracted from getting shots in arms and our economy booming again. This is a fight for California's future. You know, since this pandemic started, uncertainty, well, it's been probably the only thing that we can be certain of. But now we're providing a little bit more certainty that we're safely vaccinating Californians as quickly as possible, certainty that we're safely reopening our economy, and certainty that we're safely getting our kids back into the classroom, all of which adds up to a much brighter future for our state. Because California, we're not going to come crawling back. We will roar back. You know, when this pandemic ends, and it will end soon, we're not going to go back to normal. Because I think we all agree, normal is never good enough. You know, normal accepts inequity. That's why Latinos are dying from COVID at a higher rate than any other racial or ethnic group. And while essential workers' wages aren't enough for them to afford the essentials. And why mothers have been leaving the workforce in staggering numbers. Look, our eyes are wide open to what's wrong. And so our journey back must also be a path to close those inequities. There is no economic recovery without economic justice. With more compassion, more empathy, more connection, we can write the next chapter in California's story. After all, the answer to what's right about our state is also readily available to us, so long as we stay focused on what makes California just so damn special. You know, throughout this pandemic, we've been forced to find new ways to connect, new ways to collaborate, and new ways to serve, as well as new ways to grow and new ways to innovate. And of course, we have more scientists, more engineers, more researchers, more Nobel laureates in California than any other state. And to keep this conveyor belt for talent moving, we're going to keep investing in our UCs, our CSUs, and our community colleges. California is the most innovation, venture capital, and small business investment in the country. And so we're going to keep investing and fostering in every small entrepreneur, the drivers of our GDP, our agricultural industry. It feeds the nation. And California's entertainment industry, well, it shapes global culture. We build the future the rest of the world only dreams of. And I mean that, by the way, quite literally. Just think about this. This year, we're going to invest over $10 billion in the nuts and bolts of California. Infrastructure like roads and rail and bridges and public transit. The biggest infrastructure package, by the way, since the Great Recession over a decade ago. Building towards universal broadband, connecting all Californians equitably and affordably, and investing in our most important asset, our children. You know, we propose in this year's budget to invest a record amount in K-14 education this year. Because by planning ahead and through prudent fiscal management, California benefits this year from surpluses, not deficits, record reserves, not cuts. You know, we started this year with a $15 billion surplus, and since then, our revenues have grown even stronger, allowing us to provide for a down payment on building our brighter future. Look, the building blocks of our recovery really are in place. And now we're leading the way out of this pandemic because we listened to the experts and we were guided by evidence. Today, the light at the end of this tunnel is brighter than ever. You know, from the peak of January, just think about this, from the peak of early January, we've gone from reporting 53,000 COVID cases a day to 2,600. The positivity rate is down from 14% to just 2.2% today. Hospitalizations are down more than 80% since their peak, and ICUs are down 77%. And tonight, I'm proud to report that California has administered nearly 11 million doses. That's 3 million more doses of vaccine than any other state in America. So now we look ahead to better days with that California can-do spirit, with the energy and the optimism that defines us. We're going to beat this virus, and we're going to realize our California dream for all. How are we going to do it? Well, equitable and plentiful vaccines, economic support for those who struggle the most, and getting our kids safely back into schools as soon as possible. First, we're going to make sure that every Californian that needs a vaccine can get one. In our state, your access to vaccine must not depend on who you know. See, we prioritize those who are at the greatest risk and with the greatest exposure to the virus. We don't just talk about vaccine equity. We've designed our entire system around it, setting aside 40% of vaccines to the most impacted communities. You know, vaccine equity is not just the right thing to do, it's also the fastest way through this pandemic. Grocery workers prioritize, school staff prioritize, farm workers put to the front of the line. Like 85-year-old Maria. I met her in Fresno. She's from Reedley, California. She came to this country from Mexico decades and decades ago to find a job in our fields. You know, Maria said she was unsure, she was uncertain about getting vaccinated. But after she received her shots, she's now educating other farm workers about the safety and the efficacy of the vaccine, helping them overcome similar anxieties. You know, that's the beauty of California. Leadership like Maria's. It isn't ordained, it's earned. We've built a vaccination system where the only constraint now is simply manufactured supply. And thanks to the Biden administration, those doses are on their way. You know, I've had the privilege over the course of the last many weeks to travel all across the state. I've had the chance to see firsthand the strength of communities banding together in Coachella, in Arvin, in Camarillo, and Stockton, stepping up to vaccinate the most vulnerable and the too often overlooked. Every Californian will have access to convenient shots, including those that are homebound and those who don't have transportation or don't have the internet. And now, with greater supply, we're starting to realize the old challenge is going to emerge, and that's the challenge as old as the vaccine themselves, and that's hesitancy about whether to get it in the first place. Just ask Maria. And to address those concerns, we've invested in a large network of trusted community partners, and they're helping us spread the word in many languages and across many different cultures. Vaccines are safe. Vaccines are effective. Vaccines will save your life, allowing you to visit your parents again, go to your daughter's basketball game, show up for shift work without fearing an infection. You know, it was a year ago that we made that incredibly difficult decision to issue that stay-at-home order to slow the spread. You know, we agonized about it. We agonized about the sacrifices that it would require. But we made sure that science, not politics, drove our decisions. And as experts like Dr. Fauci said, it was the right thing to do. People are alive today because of the public health decisions we made. Lives saved because of your sacrifice. Even so, I acknowledge that it's made life hard. It's made life unpredictable, and you're exhausted by all of it. And for the millions of Californians pushed out of the workplace, pushed out the workforce, and those essential workers with no choice but to keep showing up, you are the ones we fight for, because your future and our brighter future depends on it. We continue to work every single day to safely reopen our economy, guided by equity principles, accounting for vaccines and moving as fast as we can, though always mindful that we can't let down our guard, particularly with so many of these new variants. You know, as of today, 24 of our 58 counties are out of the most restrictive tier. and many more are poised to move next week. And as we safely reopen, we're also mindful that we need to do more to provide financial relief. You know, just a few weeks ago, we took action, working with legislative leaders for immediate stimulus to millions and millions of Californians. We just directed $7.6 billion back to hardworking Californians and small businesses hit hardest by COVID. We didn't wait for Washington, we acted with urgency. And that included the Golden State stimulus, which will put $600 directly in the pockets of millions of families, no matter, by the way, what their immigration status is. And it included supporting our essential workers with new child care subsidies, more funding for food banks and diapers, as well as financial assistance to farm workers. You know, we'll keep the dream alive, but not only for our families, but for all those small businesses who fought so hard to survive over the past year. You know, it's that special mix of audacity, human capital, and creativity found only in California. That means there's literally no better place to do business. California is where garages are the launch pads for world-changing industries. And anyone with the telltale tenacity of a small business owner can create their own California dream, but only if we nurture them. And that's why we're providing the largest small business grant program in the nation, $2.6 billion, up to $25,000 for small businesses and nonprofits impacted by the pandemic. And behind these grants, there are countless stories of entrepreneurs and the dreams they've pursued with every ounce of energy that they have. Like Francisco in Fresno, who received $5,000 to reopen his pastry business after being closed for nearly 6 months. And Katara, right here in LA, whose dessert cafe used a $15,000 grant to make payroll. And 40,000 other businesses and counting, barbershops and auto repair shops and clothing shops throughout our state. 3/4, by the way, of these grants have gone to minority, women, and veteran-owned businesses, and those serving in rural as well as low-income communities. We're not just talking about equity, we're building it into the very fabric of all of our programs. Now, there's nothing more foundational to an equitable society than getting our kids safely back into the classrooms. Remote learning, it's exacerbated the gaps we've all been working so hard to close. Our kids are missing too many rites of passage, field trips and proms and graduations, teachers pulling triple duty as counselors, curriculum developers, tech specialists, parents desperate for reopening dates. Look, Jen and I, we live this as parents of 4 young children, helping them cope with the fatigue of what my youngest son calls Zoom school. The loneliness of missing their friends, frustrated emotions they don't even yet fully understand. In December, it was not that long ago, in December, as COVID was surging, many schools were contemplating an alarming decision, giving up completely on in-person instruction for the rest of the school year. In just a few months since, working together with parents and teachers and school leaders, we've turned the conversation from whether to reopen to when. Every day, every single day, more and more schools are announcing reopening dates. In fact, almost 7,000 schools are now open or plan to reopen by mid-April for in-person instruction. 7,000. But California has about 11,000 schools in over 1,000 school districts spread across 58 counties, all locally controlled. So we're not going to be satisfied until everybody is safely back in the classroom. And to achieve this, well, we've delivered 3 months' worth of PPE to every single school. We've directly enabled schools to provide routine COVID testing, especially for low-income students. And starting last week, California promised that at least 10% of all of our vaccine allocation will go directly to teachers and school staff. And in the first week alone, we've already administered more than 210,000 doses to educators, a pace more than double our goal. And just last week, working with the legislature, we committed $6.6 billion. $6.6 billion for learning loss, for tutoring, for mental health, and the ability to extend school days and the flexibility to extend the school year. We can do this. The science, it's sound. We start with the early grades, we build confidence, and we build up from there. Look, getting kids back to school, getting shots into arms, getting the economy back on its feet, these are urgent priorities, but they're not the totality of our efforts. You know, we entered this pandemic with a care economy suffering from decades and decades of underinvestment, a societal scourge that the First Partner has shined a light on. Working women, particularly women of color, earning only a fraction of what their male counterparts earn, widening gaps between the haves and the have-nots. California's most acute pre-existing condition remains income inequality. So as we respond to this pandemic, we need to stay fixated on closing these unacceptable disparities. That's one of the fundamental reasons I ran for governor in the first place. And by any measure, we're making great strides. Just consider this. We've rewarded working families by nearly tripling the earned income tax credit, increasing child care subsidies, and adding 2 more weeks of paid family leave, as well as raising the minimum wage to $14 on its way to $15 an hour. We're providing the first ever health care subsidies for middle-class Californians so they can afford coverage. And we're increasing student financial aid as well as public assistance. We're making community college. This has gotten lost in all the conversations, making community college free for 2 years, creating opportunity for all. But I'm mindful, I'm mindful that we aren't really addressing the needs of all people in poverty unless we account for the biggest pressure most families face. And that's the issue of housing, in particular housing stability. And so we crafted the strongest eviction controls in the nation, protecting millions of renters from losing their homes in the midst of this pandemic, and provided a framework for billions and billions of dollars in rental support for struggling landlords, all while remaining laser focused on the most severe part of the housing crisis, homelessness. You know, this is a crisis predating the pandemic. In response, we have developed brand new solutions, including 2 programs promoted by the Biden administration as a model to the other 49 states. Project Roomkey was launched in April, and it's provided over 35,000 homeless Californians with a safe shelter from COVID. And HomeKey, that was launched just in July, that's created more than 6,000 new permanent housing units during this pandemic, buying hotels and motels, converting them at 1/3 of the cost of traditional supportive housing. We did this cheaper. We did this faster than homeless housing has ever been built in the history of our state, literally rewriting the book on how to tackle homelessness. And while we acted swiftly during this pandemic, we are mindful. None of us are naive. We are mindful that these tent cities on our sidewalks, these encampments along our freeways, they simply remain unacceptable. And so our challenge moving forward is crystal clear: to continue our immediate progress while focusing on our longer-term goals. By the way, many of those I laid out in detail in last year's State of the State. Now, bringing that same spirit of innovation behind Roomkey and HomeKey, we're committing this year to nearly $2 billion to create more housing for our homeless this year, addressing mental health at the same time as well as substance abuse issues, and ending homelessness one person at a time. No one's denying that this isn't a huge challenge, but we know what it means to stare down big challenges. You know, in 2020, we simultaneously faced 2 once-in-a-generation crises. And when we combated the worst wildfire season in our state's history in the middle of the pandemic. The fact is the hots are getting hotter, the dries are getting drier, and it's not just here in California, but all across the globe. Let's call it what it is: climate change. Just as we approach COVID, we are guided by science. Just consider last summer. Last summer's heat dome over the entire west coast of the United States, which led to world record-breaking temperatures here at home. And in just one 24-hour period last August, 12,000 lightning strikes sparked 560 wildfires, requiring heroic efforts by our firefighters and National Guard, who landed helicopters into flames to save fellow Californians. This year, we're budgeting more than $1 billion for fire prevention, including fuel breaks, forest health, and home hardening. We forged an historic partnership with the U.S. Forest Service to radically ramp up forest management efforts, reducing barriers on hundreds of fuel reduction projects and prescribed burns, adding 30 new fire crews and pre-positioning assets, new C-130s, new Black Hawk helicopters, and new radar technology. But historic wildfires, they're the symptom. Greenhouse gases, they're the cause. And to address them, we must confront the source of more than half of the emissions in our state, and that's transportation. And I was proud to sign groundbreaking executive order just last year requiring that all new cars and passenger trucks sold in California be zero emissions by 2035. And the car companies led by Ford, GM, Volvo, and others seized the opportunity to innovate, create jobs, and dominate the industry of the future, proving yet again that protecting our planet, protecting it, and growing our economy, they're not conflicting goals. They're one in the same. Look, there's no doubt that California is the pace setter of environmental policy. Yet we're also mindful of our responsibility to do even more. You know, it's really that restless spirit that I think defines California. We know there's no advancement without effort, no success of any type without sacrifice. You know, to paraphrase St. Francis, the patron saint of my hometown, now is the time to tell the world about our brighter future. And only if necessary will we use words. See, we know that our strength comes not from what we preach, but from what we do. From our people who get their hands dirty each and every day, who come home tired and do it all to give their kids a better life. You know, when we set our minds to it, California could truly reach the stars. You know, it's just a few weeks ago, a NASA rover, appropriately named Perseverance, landed safely on Mars 293 million miles away. It was a breakthrough achievement made possible by the engineers and scientists at our very own Jet Propulsion Lab in Pasadena, led in part by the vision and drive of a Lebanese immigrant who was educated in California schools and rose to become the head of JPL, by the risk-taking that's in our DNA, and by the dream to discover new frontiers, by the sheer force of will. It was an achievement made possible by California. And it tells you everything you need to know about who we are and what we can be. But California isn't the world's best place by birthright. We have to earn it each and every day. And our hopeful vision of a brighter future is the basis for the decisions we make today. We place faith over fear, optimism over pessimism. The power truly is in our hands. This is our moment to create the California we all want to live in, to extend the dream of prosperity, of equity, and progress to all, and to continue to lead the world into the future once more. Thank you, all of you, and take care, and good night.